Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast. Here's your host, Pete Tigers.
My guest today has run and edited a newspaper, a music magazine, has been published in Rolling Stone, has edited Flyfish Journal, and now works at Patagonia as head of fishtails. He's also a musician who plays banjo and sings with his band, South Sound Tug and Barge. While at Flyfish Journal, he helped create a whole new culture in how people looked at fly fishing in the US and how people like myself and many others in the UK viewed our pastime too. It is my great pleasure to welcome Steve Duda to the podcast. Steve, it's wonderful to have you here. How are you doing?
I'm awesome, Pete. It's great to be here. I've been really looking forward to our conversation.
Me too, and I know we've spoken a fair bit off mic already, but there's loads to get stuck into. That's a really impressive CV from an editing and writing standpoint. Has it been fun so far?
Well, I like to say that it beats working, Pete. But yeah, I mean, I have to say that really in terms of writing, if I didn't write, I honestly don't know what I would do. It's really my only marketable skill. So I'd be like, who knows what I'd be doing, Pete? I don't know. I do not know. That's the only thing I can do, the only thing I'm really decent at besides tricking fish occasionally.
For our listeners then, we'll get on to the writing shortly, but for our listeners, can you tell us where you're based?
I am in Seattle, Washington, which is on the west coast of the United States, upper northwest corner, I should say. Most of your listeners probably know Seattle from the grunge music movement, the home of Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, all those bands from the 2000s.
And I haven't visited there, but I get the sense it is a creative part of the world for some of the reasons that you've already mentioned. Would that, along with the fishing, be one of the reasons that you live there, or did you just keep drifting west?
I just kept drifting west, Pete. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. And that state is surrounded by the Great Lakes. And there's plenty of fishing there. There's also, steelhead fishing there. There's good trout fishing there. But I wasn't much of a fisherman growing up. And I didn't really pick it up until I started my move west into Boise, Idaho. Boise is an amazing fishing town. There's some beautiful rivers in that state. It's one of those huge western states that is just full of rivers, full of mountains. And in Boise, if you don't fish, you have to ask yourself what you're doing there. That's where I picked up fly fishing. And that was 35, 40 years ago. And I really haven't stopped.
And so for you, did writing and fishing go hand in hand?
No, not really. I started writing when I was about 14 or 15. I started getting published in local music magazines as a just reviewing records. And about that time, I started my own little punk rock fanzine and started interviewing bands and putting out little Xeroxed little fanzines, right? And that was the start of writing for me. And that was the bug. I mean, it was the one thing for me, that one passion, that one thing I thought I was good at, the one thing that sort of fired not only that sense of creativity for me, but also, Pete, a sense of worth, right? When you're good at something, or when you think you're good at something, when it makes life worthwhile, right? It gives you that sense of purpose, which especially as a kid, 14, 15, 16 years old, is something that you really need, something that pushes you forward in life, right? It gives you a purpose.
Was that the inspiration then for you to continue this journey that, we're sitting talking about tonight, that the writing bug and the confidence, I guess, from when you see those, I remember from punk, my end as well, that those fanzine things that were put out in a similar sort of way, made at home, but captured the essence of that whole sort of movement. Was that the catalyst for the journey that you started with your writing?
Absolutely, Pete. It was a way to express, a way to get your voice out there, get your voice heard, and it also, in a more general and a broader sense, it was about authenticity, which is what fly fishing is about. You're on the river when there's no one else around, and it's just you and the water and the fish. You're your authentic self in that moment, right? And if you can express that in your writing, or if you can give that sense of wonder to other people, that, as a writer, that's our job. That's what we do, right? Trying to convey those moments, convey those emotions, convey that feeling. It's often ineffable, but that's what makes it interesting for us as writers.
Yeah, beautifully put, beautifully put. And so music took you a little bit further, and you ended up editing a music publication. That must have been really fun and deeply interesting as well. And I'm guessing that you got the opportunity to meet people who had an impact on your life as well.
Yeah, I moved to Seattle in the early 90s, so it was sort of the heyday of the grunge movement. And I was the editor of a West Coast magazine called The Rocket. And it was bi-weekly, had a circulation of like 250,000, so it was really out there. And spoke to everyone, all genres of music, mostly rock-based, but also hip-hop, electronic stuff, jazz, jazz-adjacent stuff. So I was always been passionate about music, all genres, and that did give me the opportunity to talk to some really, really creative folks, and to have those sorts of experiences, like sort of peeking behind the curtain of the music industry and seeing what it was really like, seeing what these personalities were like, and also engaging with really creative people and seeing what made them tick. I think as a writer and as an editor, what we do is ask questions. What we do is really try to satisfy our curiosity and get people to tell us their stories. What's it like? What's it really like? How do you do it? What's behind that magic? And it's often ineffable. It's often beyond words, but it's our job to sort of dig in there and find out what it's all about. And to me, that's endlessly fascinating, and it's super, super fun.
Yeah. And I'm assuming you were making music yourself then, and it must have been fascinating speaking to people. Like you say, it's very difficult to understand, and that well-cliched term, the X factor, but understanding it and trying to grab a little bit of it sometimes just to try and understand it must have been part of the fun for you as well. And did that impact how you looked at the music that you were making at the time as well?
Not particularly. I mean, I've always been like someone who doesn't like to really mime or copy or be influenced. So as a writer, when I'm in the midst of writing a piece, I won't read any other writers. When I'm making music, I try not to listen to other musicians in that particular genre, because I don't want to do what they're doing. I don't want to copy. I don't want those influences seeping into what my process is, right? So I try to be in sort of a cocoon or a bubble and just sort of dig into my own style, my own thing, right? Because I think in writing or in music, it's too easy to be influenced, and it's too easy to copy that stuff. And it's just not that interesting when you go down that path. That's not what the creative process is about, and it sort of just cheapens it a bit for me.
It's fascinating what you say there, and it makes absolutely perfect sense too. And also, from a writing perspective, and for people listening, and I know you have, and we try to encourage people to put pen to paper, is not to try and make it in a style. You can read something, and I read, and I'm a fan of your writing, but I can't write like yourself, so I have the style that I want to write in. And that's a really important point that you've put there, isn't it? Because it is easy to say, well, yeah, I could make it a bit wordy here or add extra words. And I'm sure as an editor, you'd know that you receive a piece and you think, well, I can probably cut that sentence in half or possibly a little bit more, because people send you what they think you want to read, but I want to read what they really have written and get to the heart of it. Do you find that yourself?
Yeah, yeah. When I was editing Flyfish Journal, I had a couple rules that I told all my writers about stuff I didn't want, and these were like really the only rules. I wanted no hero stories. I don't want to read about you being the hero, about you overcoming or conquering the fish. I don't want a Moby Dick story, right? It's boring. We've been reading those things for 400 years in fly fishing literature. I don't want a gonzo story, like a Hunter S. Thompson sort of, look how much I drank, look how hard I partied, look how wild and crazy. That is also a no-go. And the final one is I didn't want any dead dad stories. And I think you know what that one is too,
Yeah.
right? Just these sort of maudlin, over-the-top, emotional, sort of tearjerker pieces.
Yeah.
Other than that, go do your thing, man. And let's read it. Let's have fun. Let's tell me a great story. Also, I would encourage people not to hew too closely to this notion of truth. Don't really care if what you're writing about really happened. We're not reporting for the New York Times or the Guardian here, man. We're telling fishing stories. So let's make this good. Let's make this a fun story.
Nice, and that probably frees the writer up a bit more as well, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's about, like I said, it's about creativity. It's about telling great stories that people want to read. And those three rules that I had, it only took me a paragraph or two reading a manuscript to tell if my rules were being violated, and they would go back on the stack of no's.
Yeah. And for you then, and I know we started to talk about this off mic then, because if I'm sent something, I'll skim it really quickly just to see if it grabs me. And I guess very loosely that those terms apply as well to a degree, but I will look at it, I'll read it, and then if it's got that hook, it's got its hook into me, that's probably a yes, and then we look at it a little bit more closely. Would that be a similar sort of process for yourself then on that basis?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure with you too, Pete, you could tell pretty much within a couple paragraphs what was happening in this piece and whether it deserved time. There's a lot of just real subtle things that writers can do. I think a good writer can tell a story, right? Can grab you and go from point A to B to C and the end. I think great writers, skilled writers, take that a step farther. They can manipulate the structure, right? They have a sense of dialogue. They just know how to sort of mix up the elements of story so it's not linear. It's not A to B to C. And that's another sort of subtle point that as an editor, we look at, right? So mostly I think, okay, have I read this piece before in another form? Have I already seen this? Is this stock? Is this something that the reader has already seen? And as an editor at Flyfish Journal and at Patagonia, I'm always looking for stuff that's stock. And if I've seen it before, it just can't work, right?
Yeah. There's some really interesting points. And I think about yourself as a writer and the piece that you wrote about the swallow. And that's a perfect example of taking a piece in many directions as you're actually writing it. So, you talk about what happened, and then this is from memory as well, but then you talk about the bird itself, and then about how's it going to be when you put your coat over it to make sure it's okay. And there's a bit of, it jumps, but smoothly jumps. It's a beautiful movement in between. And that, I think, for me, is similarly that the skill of being able to take a piece of work just to that extra level and put something on it. Because I guess for people, if they're writing, it's difficult, isn't it? If you're trying to write, and if you're writing for a monthly magazine, you're in danger of going into some formula mode, really, aren't you? Just to get yourself through and get that content for an editor who wants content, and a writer that wants payment for content as well. So you can very easily fall into that formula, can't you?
Yeah, it's true. I think one of the things that Fly Culture and Flyfish Journal have in common is that it is about the writing, first and foremost, right? We look first at if the writing is good. That is more important than the quarry, the setting, right? Or even the subject matter. Is the writing good? I mean, that was the lodestar. That is the lodestar, I think, for both of our magazines. And that's the difference. That's what sets them apart from how to, where to, what rock to stand on, what fly to tie on, right? People can get that stuff anywhere. But that sense of authenticity, that genuine evocation of what it's like to be standing on that rock, what it's like to be tying on that fly, what's the inner dialogue, right? What are we trying to overcome? What problems are we trying to surmount, right? What doubts are we overcoming? All of those elements that surround us as we fish, the natural history around us, the geology around us, right? The sense of time in the rocks, the motion of the water, the sounds, all of those things, when we're out on the river, can be overwhelming, right? In a beautiful, gorgeous sense. And if that can be conveyed, that is what is success.
Yeah.
For a writer.
Yeah, like that very, very much. For you then, was it a big change going from music to fly fishing? Are the changes less subtle or greater as a result of genres or completely different? Is the editing role still similar in that sense? And I'm guessing you're taking over from what you were doing in the music magazine as well into Flyfish Journal too.
Yeah, there wasn't much of a change, Pete, and I'll tell you why. Because both writing about music, writing about fishing, is writing about passion. It's writing about wonder, right? It's writing about things that bring us joy, right? So there's real similarities there, right? And yeah, they might seem different, writing doing an interview about a band or writing a record review. But to me, what's compelling is trying to get at the root, trying to understand what this thing is. What is the essence of it? What is the essence of music? Well, gosh, who knows? What is the essence of fly fishing? It's so many things, right? So there's, two different things to write about, but they're so connected. And I think I'd say that, just speaking with you off mic and in our email conversations, that music and fishing are connected in many, many ways. Driving to the water, you have your buddy in the seat next to you and you're listening to music, or you're just talking, or pulling on your waders in the parking lot, there's music going. We connect those long drives to go fishing with the music, with our friends. That's always there. Even standing, this sounds really cheesy and sort of sentimental to say, Pete, but I'm going to say it anyway. Just standing on the water. There's that music all around us, the music of the river, the music of a beautiful river canyon, right? The birds, the water itself. It's just, that does sound sentimental. I apologize.
No, it's just the right side, and you're dead right, because it will resonate with people. And I described a river as chattering away yesterday, and you can hear it, and I suddenly dawned on me, and somebody sent me a message about something or other, and I said, it's really strange. Whenever I walk the dog, it's funny, it's always by a river somewhere. And it is to be close to that. Even if I can't fish it, the rivers have been shot here. I'm hopefully out next week to have a go. And being close to it, the noise, the birds, you notice, it's almost like your senses are heightened a little bit as well when you're standing in the river, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our senses are afire when we're on the river, right? They have to be, because in that moment, we're hunters, right? We have to be in tune with everything, and I think that makes us really, really human at that moment, right? It might be sort of a primitive notion that we're encountering there, but all your senses are on fire. Your sight, your hearing, you're just trying to be in tune and perceive all of the stuff that's happening around you for one reason, and that's to try to understand what's happening under that water, where those fish might be, what sort of mood they're in, what you can do to try to trick one, right?
Yeah. And while we're talking about the fish, you're in steelhead country. How does that look to you? How does the state of fish populations, is it the similar sort of curve that we're seeing? I suspect I know that answer already, but are you feeling and sensing, are we at some form of tipping point, or is there hope?
Well, steelhead season, it opens today in the coastal rivers on Washington, and the outlook isn't good. We've got some river closures. We've got some more regulations on how to fish and not fishing from the boat. And the forecasts are dire. And we have a bit of a joke. It's not even a joke. Sometimes there's mixed emotions now, Pete, when we go fish steelhead on the coast of Washington here, that we don't want to be the guy who catches the last wild steelhead.
Yeah.
And it's a sad thing to say, but it's true. And if we lose these fish, we lose more than just fishing.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why, the work that I'm able to do at Patagonia in terms of reconnecting rivers, fighting against hatchery fish, fighting against fish farms is so very important, because we're not just selling waders. We're fighting for a fishable future, right? We're fighting for that fish culture that we all love so much.
And so, given that background that we are so worried, does the fly fishing world, have you experienced, we talked about this lockdown growth in fishing, and have you sensed that there has been a follow through with that as well, that the numbers of people are still growing given that background?
I mean, fly fishing did experience a growth spurt, but I think it's it happens in cycles. It's up, it's down, it's up, it's down. There'll always be fly fishing. There'll always be fishermen. There have been for thousands of years, right? People have been tying yarn to the end of string and trying to fool fish with it. So it's not going, that part's not going away. What we do have to fight for and be engaged in is constructive advocacy and activism to keep wild fish in connected rivers.
And are you seeing people pick up those cudgels to help fight more so? Because I often think, and we have organisations here, but I think of people like Trout Unlimited that seem to me, at least as a somebody looking in, have political clout or have numbers. Are those sorts of organisations helping that cause along with the work that you're doing at Patagonia as well?
Well, I think everyone does their bit. Everyone does, at least in the fly fishing community here in the West. Everyone realizes the state of the game and realizes that, yeah, we are at a tipping point. And it's at this point, if you're not an activist for wild fish, don't even pick up a rod, maybe take up bowling or golf or something, because that is part of being a fly fisherman, is working for wild fish, clean waters, and doing everything in our power to make sure these fish have a future. Right? I mean, it's serious as a heart attack out here, Pete. I mean, we're seeing numbers continue to decline. And there are some bright spots, right? We're taking down dams out here. We've just kicked out fish farms from Washington State. And anglers are coming together to realize that this is on us. We're the ones who are doing the heavy lifting when it comes to fish conservation and conservation in general. We're the river users who are making a difference. We can't depend on any other constituency. It's up to us. And I think we're getting it done. So I'm always sort of glass half full guy, right? And I think by our nature, as fly fishermen, we are optimistic. We know what failure means as fishermen, right? We surmount failure all the time. But there's always another cast, there's always another run, and there's always another day, right? And as long as that exists, we'll continue to be out there and we'll continue to fight for what we love.
Yeah, nicely put. And we've got to do that. And I know listeners will be bored of me talking about, as we come into Christmas, please, please, please don't eat farmed salmon. Please, if you get the chance, to tell family members if they're planning the menu for Christmas or family occasions, try to get them not to eat salmon. That would just be really,
don't
really
eat
cool.
Farmed salmon. Don't eat farmed salmon. And not just because the just sewer that they live in, but they're really not good for you, right? You'd be better off eating some hot dogs.
Yeah, of dubious origin, yeah.
Right.
But yes, so I wanted to move back to the writing thing, because I said in the introduction about, the impact that you had with Flyfish Journal on the culture of fishing and the way that you were looking at fishing. That was clearly a conscious decision to do that. But were you surprised? Were you happy with the impact that had with the end users and how that it got them to think about what they're doing with fishing as well?
I think, Pete, what we were doing with Flyfish Journal wasn't, at the time it was new, but in a broader horizon, it wasn't that new. Fly fishing as a sport has the greatest literary tradition of any sport on this planet. We're just getting back to our roots, man. Think of the great writers that we have in our canon and name another sport that comes close. There's not one. So what we were doing is saying, hey, man, fly fishing and writing, peanut butter and jelly, right? Let's just get back to that. People love fly fishing literature. If you're a fly fisherman and you can't be out on the water, Let's read about it, right? So what we were doing wasn't that new. It was in the context. It was new in the context, but fly fishing literature has always existed and it's always been great. So we were just getting back to that tradition.
That's very beautifully and modestly put as well, because I know when I first saw it, I thought, wow, these people feel like I do about fishing, and I'm sure many people do. And like you said, perhaps it is, but we were getting a chance to read people that I wasn't aware of, away from the famous literary classics that we've all obviously delved into and enjoyed, and getting a contemporary spin on it. And I think that's what appealed to me so much about it, and why I enjoyed that so much. And so did that feel, I'm just sort of trying to get that sort of feel of you sitting back as somebody doing something similar when that edition goes out, and you think to yourself, yeah, this is cool, and I'm really, really happy with it. Did you get that feel when that came together and it went off to the printer?
Yeah, Pete. I mean, you know what it's like when you get, whether you're a writer and that magazine arrives and you have a piece in it, and you crack that book open and there it is. You're writing, your words, your creation, right? Your heart beats a little bit faster. And you get this sense of, gosh, I did that, right? And that's what drives us toward quality, is the fact that your name is on it. And it's not going away. And you are now a part of the great history of fly fishing, right? You have now influenced the sport. Your little 400-word piece of scribbling, of weirdness, will live forever, right? So it's a legacy thing. And that legacy compels us toward quality. That's what we were interested in. And, we were doing a literary journal, but we were doing it in camouflage. It was surrounded by fantastic photography, illustrations, right? So we were dressing up culture in cool new clothes and making this art cool, which is what we do, right? I mean, if you look at, we were talking about punk rock a little bit ago. The Sex Pistols weren't something new and revolutionary. They were playing 4/4 rock and roll on Gibsons. That had been going on for decades before they picked it up and started swearing. So it's just a different coat, right? But still rock and roll. We were doing fly fishing literature. Maybe we swore a little bit. Maybe the settings were different, right? But it was still literature. It was still fly fishing art with a capital A. And you know what? There's nothing to be ashamed about. Making art, right?
Nice.
And it's like, it's sort of like, this is not corporate culture. This is authentic, boots on the ground. We know what it's like to be there. Here's what it's like to be there, right? And that's what we strive to do, both in fly culture and Flyfish Journal.
Nice. What were you most proud of on that time there? What was the thing you look back now, and we're going to look at you moving on to Patagonia as well, but what were you most proud of? Was there something that you reflect on and think, yeah, that was great?
Looking back, to me, I think the most gratifying thing was bringing new voices into the sport. Having that sort of mentorship role, introducing new writers, and seeing them thrive, go on and have careers in the fly fishing industry, or, taking a piece from its infancy and developing it into something that's just from good to great. That's sort of the stuff that behind the scene things that as an editor make the job worth doing. And of course, Pete, we work in fly fishing, right? There's not a lot of these gigs. It's like I consider myself extremely lucky to be able to have been the editor of Flyfish Journal. I consider myself lucky to be a fly fishing writer. I mean, it's just I don't know what I did in a past life to deserve it, but here I am.
Must have been something good.
Yeah.
Or bad, actually.
Yeah.
I often worry that our mag will need fresh eyes on it and a new look at things, and a fresh view, because I used the word formula earlier, and I steer clear of that approach as much as I possibly can. Did you ever feel that and think, right, okay, perhaps it needs something new or get other people to look at it and get input, or did you ever go through that process yourself?
Pete, I think that's our job as editors, is to bring those new voices in, those new perspectives in. I mean, that's really the nitty gritty of being an editor, is like, what's going to keep this thing fresh? Well, it's not the same writer writing the same story. It's a new writer from a new perspective, writing a different story, right? So, I mean, that defines the job of an editor.
Yeah. So was it a hard decision when you came to move from Flyfish Journal? Was that a heart-wrenching, long thought-out process for you?
I mean, I think that I was really, really fortunate to have the opportunity to move to Patagonia. I think there's few companies, right, that I would be willing to make the move from. But Patagonia is a special company. It's a special place, right? I get up in the morning to go to work, and I don't necessarily have to try to sell someone a pair of waders. I get to work in fish advocacy. I get to tell stories. I get to try to make our sport better by the work that Patagonia does. So in that sense, it was a pretty easy decision to move. And it made it less painful to move, that's for sure.
And I'm getting that sense, and I'm sure many of the people listening, it is the company we think it might be to work for. It's true. You've talked about activism and fish advocacy. It is the company we think it is. That it is straight down the line, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. The folks I work for are all committed, deeply, deeply committed to the fish that we love, and to doing everything in our power to make sure that the gear we sell contributes to doing that, like using recycled materials, reusing and recrafting older materials, donating our profits, all of them now, since we've given the company away, to conservation efforts. So it's not just talk, right? It's real work, and that's the mission of this company. So hacking capitalism in that way, it's a way to bring about real change. And the work we do on the fish side, when we give money to small boots on the ground conservation groups, it makes a big difference for them. The money we give folks, it sometimes keeps them going. It keeps them afloat. And the work they do at a grassroots level is extremely important. Without these groups out there, the conservation efforts across our sport would evaporate in many ways. So, selling waders selling waders for us is a way to keep our sport alive. right? Selling boots for us is a way to keep our sport alive. Selling puffy coats to moms pushing baby strollers down the sidewalk helps fly fishing. And I'm all for it.
Me too. Me too. We touched on music, and we know what an important part of your life it is. It's taken to the UK, actually. You came over here, you toured with a band. How did you find it, and did you get to fish?
No. Well, fly fishing in the States and the UK are very different. And it was something, I wrote a piece, Legendary Rivers I Didn't Fish. As you mentioned, I was touring with a band over there. And it was a brutal, brutal tour, like 50 dates in 47 days. All of us packed in a little minivan, driving up and down the UK, not sleeping, eating poorly, staying out too late, getting up too early, and driving over these legendary rivers that I had read about countless times and just not getting to fish them. I'd get out occasionally and look at them, or I'd see guys walking to the river to go fish, and I'd have to just drive straight by it, and it was excruciating, Pete, not to be able to fish the Spey or the Tweed or the Wye. It's just it was brutal, absolutely brutal. And I haven't been back to actually get to fish. And one of the things I do want to do is get over there, sleep on your couch, and eat food from your fridge, and have you take me fishing. Just listening to your podcast, hearing you guys talk about, fishing for grayling or fishing for Atlantics, or doing some of the trout fishing you do over there on those storied rivers. To me, it's something, that's a bucket list thing.
Well, there's a couch. I've even got a bed as well, so you're allowed to sleep in that. Pete. Yeah, you're allowed to sleep in that. The dog might have to come and sleep with you, but
that's all right. I love dogs. I'll do that too, man.
That's fine. You can come whenever you like. You're welcome whenever you like. But I'm guessing listeners are getting a sense of me as a fan of Steve's writing, and I thought, because there'll be people who listen to this, certainly in the UK and Europe, who will know Steve extremely well. There might be some people who are listening that don't. And I thought it would be really, really cool to get a look and a listen to some of Steve's writing. And what he's actually done, he's in the process of writing a book, and he's actually written a piece that I've read and thoroughly enjoyed. And I asked him if he would read it for us. So Steve is going to read this, and you'll get a sense of him as a writer that I think you're going to enjoy. So over to you, Steve.
Yeah, this is a piece that I just mentioned this is an extract from a piece called Legendary Rivers I Didn't Fish. This was, I think this was in the late 90s. I was touring with a band called Rachel Harrington and the Knockouts. It was an all-female sort of country / rockabilly / garage band. And it was fun. I was the part-time, I was mostly like the roadie, just carrying guitars, occasionally playing, occasionally singing. But I sold T-shirts, I drove the van, I did all the dirty work, and just tried to keep us moving along. And as you can imagine, there was a lot of stuff that happens when you're just cruising through the UK, right? So this is the start of the piece, Legendary Rivers I Didn't Fish. Just before tea, about 3:30 in the afternoon, it's a balmy 39 degrees and hailing. Another splendid August afternoon in the Scottish Highlands. We've been driving since early morning. The singer is pouting, adamantly sticking to her vow of silence. The drummer is furious at the fiddle player for breathing too loudly. In turn, the fiddle player threatens the drummer with violence for allegedly filling in rows 7, 8, 9, 11, 16, and 25 on her crossword puzzle. The roadie banjo player, me, wants to choke the life out of everyone in the minibus. We are hungry, thirsty, tired, and no one knows the exact location of the night's gig. At the moment, as we pass over another bustling trout-packed stream etched into the hills near Dalwhinnie, Scotland, I realized how grim my situation has become. How did I end up in the far-flung northern wilds, probably lost, certainly hungover, and utterly devoid of any sort of angling implements? More than a few pints were involved. There was a sexy, smart singer that looked like an angel and sounded like Loretta Lynn with her hair on fire. The all-gal band was shit-hot and could play both country and western. They needed a driver, sound man, guitar carrier, roadie, instrument tech, t-shirt seller, tour manager, and part-time banjo picker for an absurdly unfeasible 50 gigs in 53 days Euro tour. No problem, baby. I'm your guy. Where do I sign? The Spey River, Scotland. Glasgow is ablaze. The national squad and their loyal fan mob have mustered for a home match, a World Cup qualifier, a wee bit of the football against some overmatched Eastern European team. Cops are squared up everywhere, eyes darting, heads on swivels. Sweaty, cheek to jowl intense, every bar is a capacity, and jittery punters in the white and blue of the national side pace the sidewalks, huffing hand-rolled smokes. Gangs of men amuse themselves by chanting, singing, chasing fans of the opposing side through the streets, fighting them and then setting dumpsters on fire. Smoke bombs are going off, sirens, chaos. There are still 3 hours to go before the first ball is booted. The night's gig is in an ancient stone church. At soundcheck, the music bounces and echoes off the walls in a crazy ping-pong confusion. A Gregorian chant or a string quartet may flutter to the heavens on gossamer wings in one of these old crypts, but try conjuring a coherent sound out of hillbilly harmonies, a couple of guitars, a fiddle, banjo, and a lot of foot stomping. It's a nightmare. We make it through the gig. It was fine. They can't all be worthy of the Grand Ole Opry. But there is a bright spot. For the encore, everything comes together as we buzzsaw through a cover of Dolly Parton's Jolene. The UK audience loved that one. Everyone loves that one. Outside, as we load gear into the minibus, the dumpster fires still rage. There's screaming, more sirens, more chaos. It's obvious the football match did not go as anticipated. We step into the confusion of a full-on riot. Red-faced men are running everywhere, throwing things, lighting things on fire. We cannot escape. There is no way out. The cops tell us to stay put. It's well into the early morning before we exit Glasgow. If you are in the UK on a night the home team plays a crucial match, please remember there's no satellite navigation app to circumvent the outward display of grief and disappointment, culminating in a Scottish football dust-up. We sleep in a parking lot and rise with the sun at 5 a.m. We have a long drive north to the next gig in the Highlands. Despite the misery, the ride is lovely until I don't fish the River Spey. It's crushing because the Spey is a stunning-looking river from the motorway. Soft green banks are home to lolling, well-groomed cattle. The sheep are fat and untroubled. The hawks gliding overhead seem at peace. The river has a gentle, gurgling gait, languid bends, and an uncanny way of catching the light. And yeah, There are even tiny bits of ruined castles strewn perfectly here and there. It's a painting. It looks unreal. If Disney wanted to create an animatronic old Scottish salmon stream, this is what they come up with. However, if you're not fishing it, the Spey is dismal. To make not fishing the Spey all the more painful, the A95 travels along the river, offering peaks every few kilometers. It's akin to driving along the I-90 in Montana, grazing upon the Clark Fork every 5 minutes. There it is. There it is again. Have another peek? Look at that perfect run. Was that a fish rising? My traveling companions, of course, do not give a toss that the Spey, along with the Dee, the Tay, and the Tweed, is one of the big four Scottish fly fishing rivers. They do not care that the Spey is home to its own style of fishing. They do not care that there is even a thing called a Spey rod. I attempt to impress upon them the gravity of the situation with a conversation starter. You know, I say, the Spey is known the world over for, only to suffer ironic hipster pity and cynical wisecracks. It has been raining, hailing, and howling since we left sad, battle-torn Glasgow, and now the Spey gradually opens into its regal, Spey-like size and shape. The sun pries itself from the clouds, exploding prismatic dew that shimmers the grass and tosses a spray of diamonds over the famous river like some improbably perfect magazine story where everyone catches fish, the shore lunch is delicious, and the dogs back at the lodge are all golden retrievers trained to fetch icy cold, free beers. We hustle right on by the Spey. We don't even slow down, honk the horn, or flash the lights in tribute. I feel ill. It's a sad welcome. Scotland, what have we done? We also motor right on by a few distilleries, Cardew, Dalwhinnie, and some quaint-looking pubs offering strong ales. It's horrible, frustrating, soul-crushing, but we have a gig to make. I console myself, as always, by thinking that given a day or two, my own gear and the right flies, I could really do some damage on the Spey. Atlantic salmon? Compared to the steelhead on the Olympic Peninsula, Atlantic salmon were probably easy to catch. Against hooting protest, I pull over and stop for all of 45 seconds and snap a perfectly annoying shot of a perfect bridge over a perfect bend, stood sentry by a perfect little fishing shed on the perfect Spey. A perfect Scottish river I didn't fish.
Absolutely wonderful. Absolutely love it. And this is
so
going
you got
to
to
be...
tell me, Pete, is the Spey fun? Is it a great fishing river? Do you love it?
Well, I've only fished it a couple of times, and funnily enough, I stayed near Cardew, so I know exactly where you're talking about. And I got my arse kicked both times, but that doesn't keep me it doesn't stop me from keeping to want to come back there. So perhaps we ought to go up there and give that a proper go. I've certainly got. It sounds like we both got unfinished business, so
that's right.
We can organise that for you. So that's not a problem. That was absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much for reading that for us. This is going to be part of a book. What's the plan with the book? And when do you have you finished it? Is it at a stage where we can look forward to publishing?
Yeah, book's done. It's sort of a greatest hits of 15 or 20 years of writing about fly fishing. It's called River Songs. There's 14 long pieces in it and 14 sort of interludes, short pieces that I wrote. It's due out September 1st on Mountaineers Books, available in fine bookstores and even crappy ones, hopefully. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I've got a good friend of mine and a fantastic artist, Matthew Delorme, doing woodcuts to illustrate every piece. And yeah, I'm completely stoked, Pete. It's going to be a great great experience. But it's also a combination of nervousness, and anticipation and exhilaration, right? It's been sort of the culmination of a lot of work and a lot of fishing stories. So, yeah, we're in the middle of just sort of doing the final edits, getting the book together, sending it off. So there's always something to do, but for the most part, my work is done. Hopefully, right?
Well, you've got your very first order, so that's from me.
Awesome, great.
And I hope this has given folks a chance to have a listen and a sense of you as a writer, if people don't already know. I will be banging on about this in future podcasts, so please accept my apologies. But as we do, and Steve has done, support the creative process. So I'm going to keep pushing that. And you can see the sort of writer Steve is, who captures things beautifully and beautifully insightful. And so, yeah, I'm really, really looking forward to that. So we'll keep a lookout for that. We're still on the music route at the moment, and we have a playlist, and it's been really, really interesting, coming almost full circle, really, because you talked about we've talked about music, we've talked about on the journey with a friend or alone, listening to music. And we do have a playlist on Spotify that we've had people adding tracks to. Have you got one for us?
Yeah, Pete, I listen to a lot of your podcasts. I'm a big fan, and I knew this question was coming up. I've been dreading it, like trying to whittle down how I would answer this question. And it's a tough one for me. I just spent 2 weeks out near Yellowstone Park, and I drove out with a friend who is a deadhead. And from Seattle to Yellowstone, it's probably a 12-hour drive. So 12 hours, Pete, of the Grateful Dead and Fish is a lot, even if you're a fan. So it won't be our friends in Fish or the Grateful Dead. Another friend of mine has a ritual where every time he's getting ready to fish, he puts on an album called Out Come the Wolves by Rancid. It's just sort of his ritual. It gets him all pumped up and fired up. And I love that album, but I don't know if I would pick that one. A lot of times when I'm getting ready to fish, I'll listen to something like Townes Van Zandt, right? Great American singer-songwriter who really captures the notion of the West. I like to listen to a lot of dub music because it's just sort of ethereal and lets you get sort of put in place. I spent another trip earlier this year to Montana. A friend and I wore out the new album by Panda Bear and Sonic Boom called Reset. Sonic Boom from Spacemen 3 and Panda Bear from Animal Collective, which is a fantastic record, one of my favorite records of this year. I've been going through a big sort of digging into the Falls catalog a lot lately, so I might have to throw that one in there. But I also have like my all-time favorites too. Like I love old American country music, so Buck Owens and the Buckaroos, some of those classic albums. Driving wise, I love, driving in the American West is a different thing because you're driving through a landscape. I'm sure it's much the same in the UK. So driving through that landscape, I love listening to something like by the Dirty Three. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them.
No, I don't know them.
But in terms of, I might have to go with. Let's go with something by Colter Wall. He's just a great singer-songwriter from northern Canada, who's got sort of like a Johnny Cash, lonesome vibe to him. Yeah, let's go with Coulter Wall there. Got a nice little Western sound.
Yep, like that. That's going in. So I've written that down. So I will add that very, very shortly. While we're talking about music, let's give your band a plug, because I know them, because I know from the old days when you had to buy songs on iTunes. I bought the album, so I've listened to it. But let's give your band a plug as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, South Sound Tug and Barge, a band I played in for about 5 or 6 years here in Seattle, is now defunct. We were a casualty of COVID and our guitar player moving to New Orleans, but we were a sort of a folk punk band here in Seattle. We played up and down the Northwest. Sort of sounded like well, we were sort of like a punk rock sort of folky thing. So if Joe Strummer fronted, a country band, like we had elements of punk rock and folk. We played all acoustic instruments. So the lineup was banjo, guitar, and accordion, of all things. And we were just stomping, singing, harmonizing group. And it was a lot of fun. And I miss it. But during the COVID, I managed to build a little studio in my basement, and now I'm just sort of like making weird blips and bloops with synthesizers and drum machines and sequencers and stuff like that. So that's what I'm up to now in terms of music.
Nice, fantastic. Well, when you're over, you can make some beeps and bloops on my synthesizers as well.
What do you? I'd love to see your setup, Pete. What are some of
I've got, this is going to bore listeners, but I've got an old 1971 Fender Rhodes piano and nice. A chord.
That's right, because you're a keyboard player.
A bad one, but yeah, one of those, and a chord Kronos as well. So an old one, really old one that makes weird noises and is far too complicated for somebody who grew up with analog synthesizers where you could twist and do things. Far too complicated for me, but that is really, really good fun. So yeah, there's lots to do, and yeah, we just need to sort out to get you over here. So perhaps actually we could do something when the book's out, and we'll see if we can do something with that. So we'll give that some thought.
Pete, we'll get a band together.
Oh, the band. Yeah, absolutely. We could do that. We've got somebody who writes for us who plays guitar, Dan, as well. So yeah, we can organise that. I know drummers. I know all sorts of people. So there we go. Book reading and music. What more can you want from that? Steve, this has been wonderful for me to be able to talk with you. I know we've been talking a little while now, but to actually speak with you has been fabulous. I've really, really enjoyed it. I feel like we've only really scratched the surface and could have talked.
Yeah, Pete, it went by too fast, man.
Yeah, just too quick. I think we could have carried on for a couple of hours, but thank you so much for that. We'll look out for details of the book. I know you're not a heavy social media user and handles and things like that, but if people need to find details of the book and stuff when it comes out, where do they do that?
Probably, I'm not, like you said, I'm not on socials that much, but I do have a Facebook account under my name, my real name. So you can check me up there. I'm also on Instagram. Stephen P. Duda is my handle there. So yeah, pretty easy to find.
Fantastic. Well, it's been lovely to speak with you. I'm sure we'll keep on talking afterwards as well. Thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast today and taking the time to talk with me. I greatly appreciate it. It's been wonderful.
It was my great pleasure, Pete. It was great to finally get a chance to chat with you at length, and it feels like we've got still a lot of stuff to cover.
Absolutely. Everyone, this has been the Fly Culture Podcast. This one's for Jimmy. I think you'll enjoy this one. So this one's for you, buddy. But thank you so much for listening to the Fly Culture Podcast. As ever, these are free to download. I just love talking about fishing with people, and getting the chance to speak with Steve today has been absolutely fantastic. I hope you've enjoyed his reading. I hope it's inspired you to look a little bit more deeply into what he's doing as well, and the work at Patagonia as well. So thank you so much for listening to this edition of the Fly Culture Podcast.
The Fly Culture Podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly published magazine owned and run by fly anglers. When it comes to fly fishing, we've got you covered.